and I think this is an interesting part. He's buried here in plot 860, and the question then is, well, what is plot 860? And if you actually call them up, here's what they'll tell you. 860, here's an actual slip from Washington Cemetery. Plot 860 is in Masonic Section B.
Don't stop.
I'm legit, dude. So if you want to know who created Questions and Doctrines, find who's buried, and that will answer the question for you.
Wow. This is going to stick with me for a long time. I don't know. I would like to hear how you answer that, and then I'll share you what my perspective is.
Sure. I mean, again, it comes down to what's present truth.
Yeah.
So if we don't understand what present truth is, it's going to be really hard to even answer that question.
Got it.
And that's why, again, if we look into this, I believe that, again, it's all about the map of the sanctuary. So present truth, right? Each of these, right? We read here that difficult points of present truth have been reached by earnest efforts of few who devoted the work. So you can say, okay, let's throw Ellen White out. That's what Peter says. We must be established in present truth. So what's present truth? And this is this idea that if we kind of go through it, we can say, well, what do we find? Well, we find that it's whatever truth is pertinent to the people that it's in. And that present truth, which is a test to this generation, was not a test far back. And so ultimately, that present truth in the days of Luther is not the same present truth as us. So present truth in the day of the Christian church is not the same present truth as us. Otherwise, we're stuck in the past. So you can look at the Israelites as an example. Their present truth was to watch for the Messiah. Did that happen? Yes. Are we to be watching for the Messiah again as Adventists? Yes, for his second return, this time, not his first. So that allowed, when the Messiah came, to move into the early Christian church. What was their present truth? To preach the gospel, right? Go ye therefore, baptize all nations. And it feels like this is where we're stuck as a people. It feels like this is where we're stuck. It feels like we're still sharing this as our present truth, and that's where everything ends. But again, that's this idea that, was this even accomplished? That's the question. Was this truth completed? And we read in Acts that the word of God increased. Number of disciples multiplied. Your faith was spoken throughout the whole world. In every word, your faith was spread. It was preached to every creature under heaven. That's a pretty definitive statements that this was accomplished, that the gospel was actually preached. Now, if you get in the court case, we'll understand that there need to be a 1260 year period of time where Lucifer's given keys to the kingdom. And after that time, it was preached one more time. Ellen White says, from this time, foreign missions attained unprecedented growth. And 1843, she wrote that this message was preached all over the world as a witness. And in 1843, allowed Christ to move from the holy to the most holy place. And so each of these truths allow him to move. And if we really would understand that, we would say, what is the truth of our time that allows Christ to move out of the most holy place? Right? And that ultimately is what we need to know. So what is our present truth? Well, is the Messiah come? Yes, we're Adventists. The Messiah is coming. Is our present truth that Jesus can save us from our sins? Absolutely, right? But we're preaching the everlasting gospel, not the gospel. Because there are many precious truths that contain the word of God, but it is present truth we need now. And so if we were to look through this, what is our present truth? And we can go through this whole concept of, proclamation of the three angels' messages. There's no other work of such great importance.
That's right.
Okay, then that must be our present truth. Well, let's look into that, because we find here that the three angels' messages were there to largely, the health message was there to give credence to the three angels' messages. So without the health message, we can't even get to the three angels' messages. And so that's why we have medical ministry work. That's why we have missional business, invent some way to becoming acquainted people. That's all to point to the health message, to prepare their minds to present to the three angels' messages.
Correct.
Where it ends, is at the end of it. We read here, God's purpose in giving the three angels a message is to prepare a people to stand true to him during investigative judgment. So our present truth does not end with the three angels' messages. In fact, the third angel's message is our present truth. And that's this idea that we need, this is why we do publishing houses. This is why we do schools, sanitariums, restaurants, food factories. This is our purpose, to prepare people to stand. And this is what needs to be understood. We all need to be more intelligent in the work of the sanctuary atonement above. So who do we have to give us this information? Well, that's what we have a prophet for, Ellen White. Right? Ellen White is the one that tells us the message about the most holy place people. And so without Ellen White's writings, we don't have a full understanding of who we are, and will never then be able to help Christ leave. Because if we're to be co-laborers with him, right? So we need to prepare our characters, our hearts, because there'll be a time when there'll be no mediator between God and man. The plagues will be held with no longer. And many do not realize what they need to be. They need to be keeping the commandments of God, but not on our own merits. That's why we need to have the people. Otherwise, we're going to get lost in a message of works. We're going to be locked into the old covenant. These things you say I will do versus the new covenant. I'll put my
law. And that
in your
that confirms what you said earlier about righteousness by faith, because we are told
Yes.
that the third angel's message is righteousness by faith in verity. So,
Yes.
and that message is not believed in the world either. So that is yet to be proclaimed in his full context, and for people to actually officiate the sacrifice and the benefit of the ministry of Christ. The message of righteousness by faith has to come forward because, for example, if you listen to the average Christian, and I was doing some studies furthermore about question on doctrine and the bound house and all that controversy. You know how that story goes. But at the root of it was a Calvinist view of the gospel, which is we're going to sin till Jesus comes. And that view was the very thing that led some of our men, good men, some of them, to compromise their position and kind of like do away with, some of the things that we believe in the sanctuary message, the deity of Jesus. There were a number of things, some hot spots that they've dealt with. But what you saw at the heart was there was an attack on righteousness by faith. That was misunderstood and somewhat compromised with the Calvinist view that was in the Kingdom of God's book that they were trying to write with Walter Martin. And when we compromise on that position, it's almost like we took a couple steps back. I don't think we've recovered from that ever since. We have never been the same Adventist church ever since. So I can understand what you're saying here. So present truth really brings us right back to that message where there is victory over sin, as we find in Jesus, right? They love God and keep the commandments of Jesus. So we can avoid both this law-abiding legalistic view that we need to avoid that, but there is also that liberalism, let live gospel. You kind of have to avoid that one too. It's two pitfalls you have to avoid, and you have to come to the center where Jesus really is.
It's the order, right? It's this idea that we cannot have works without faith, but faith without works is dead.
Yes.
It's also interesting. We're talking about this idea of Froome, the questions and doctrines.
Correct. There he is. That's one of them. There were a few. Where's he
buried?
Others.
Right, Frida, Froome, and Anderson, right?
Yes,
Unruh, right? Where is he buried? And I think this is the interesting part. He's buried here in plot 860, and the question then is, well, what is plot 860? And if you actually call them up, here's what they'll tell you. 860, here's an actual slip from Washington Cemetery. Plot 860 is in Masonic Section B.
Don't stop.
I'm legit, dude. So if you want to know who created questions and doctrines, find who's buried, and that will answer the question for you.
Wow. This is going to stick with me for a long time. Yeah. That answers a lot.
Look, it goes deep, man.
Yeah.
It goes so deep.
It's like when you go back to the Freemasons, you end up at the feet of the Jesuits all over again.
Yeah, but look, the whole impetus was what, right? This is the movement from 1955 to 1957.
Right.
We see, T. Unruh, he reads this article from Barnhouse from Liberty Magazine, and he doesn't want to be called a cult, and so, this is where Barnhouse invites Froome, Reed, Anderson together to be part of this committee. David Nichol, also M.L. Andreasen was also invited to be part of this, but then backed off. And M.L. Andreasen was like, no, this is like not of God. And what did they do? They took his credentials away. Then he died, and his wife was without a pension for a year until they restored his credentials, because his widow wasn't even able to live because they took everything. Dude, I'm just trying to say, the history, if you really want to get into it, we've got some dark history, there's no question. However,
it's interesting because M.L. Andreasen believed in righteousness by faith.
Fully.
he was very strong into that message, right? Kind of cooperating with the activity of the priest and so on. Kind of like he was very much strong on that. So that's the guy
That's
they
what
got rid
took him out.
so that we can have the compromisation we needed.
Yes.
What a pain. It's just crazy. So much you can learn from history. Oh, Lord have mercy.
Yes.
And nothing changed. I think we have the same issues until today.
To the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. Did you ever go through that rabbit hole?
And no,
October
not yet. Not
22nd,
yet.
1844.
I need to.
1844 takes us to 1884. First generation, Ellen White says, had the people through the great disappointment held true to their faith, ere long they would be in the heavenly kingdom. First generation, Christ could have come. That's what people ask me. When's Jesus going to come? Dude, he could have come already. The time of the end was 1844.
Yeah.
Prophetic time is no longer. That's why
Correct.
people are trying to like, Rob, you're trying to do date setting with this whole second Esdras thing.
No.
No, man. If you go back in time, you'll see he could have come in the first generation of Adventism. Then the message was rejected.
That's right.
Ellen White says the
see.
church went into a state of formalism. They said, give me a king. If you get back into it, give me a king. We want to have a general conference president, the same way that the Israelites were asking for Saul. We're asking for a king. I'm just telling you, you want to get into that stuff, you can get into it. The point simply is, second generation comes, 1884, 1924. During that time, everybody during that time was, the reformers were in that time. Every one of them died prior to 1927. Every one of them. And that message in the second generation, 1888, 4 years into the second generation, Ellen White says in May of 1903, she says, had the people, she was doing a reference to, because Jones and Wagner are Joshua and Caleb. Oh, I can get into it. Like I'm like literally avoiding going and finding the presentation because it'll just take, I don't want to get into that. But the short of it is this: second generation was Jones and Wagner, and they gave the message righteous by faith and verity. That message was rejected. Ellen White said in 1903, had the message from Jones and Wagner been accepted, we would be in the heavenly Canaan, she says. If we go to Joel talks about the cankerworm, the caterpillar, all right. He talks about these four locusts and all of these degradation creatures. And then in Joel 2, talking about the fifth generation, it's the rebirth. So we had four generations of cankers, right, of degradation. And the third and fourth generation, we got Froome. Fourth generation, we got Desmond Ford. And there were people in these times, like Priebe, like Wieland, who were standing up for righteousness by faith, but there was no real movement. Nothing ever really took off. It's because of the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. We are now in the fifth watch, right? So in the fifth generation of Adventism, 2004 unto 2044. This is the final generation. Why? Because if you do the math, right, 8031 marked 4,000 years since the first sin offering. And that takes us into a very interesting time frame. We'll just leave it.
I had an entire sermon about this. And I was going in the book of Peter. He's talking about, a day to the Lord is like 1,000 years. And it dragged me into the Old Testament from Adam to Christ, and from Christ to our time. It's kind of like, so we are 6,000 years and there's 1,000 years in heaven keeping the Sabbath. So I was like, boom. And we can't set date. We still can't set date, but we can simply say it doesn't look like, and again, this is James, please don't run with this. It doesn't look like we have 20 years left. That's a stretch. If I'm adding 20 years, it's a whole lot, at least from my perspective.
Check out my course called Pattern Matching Time. And in this, I just lay it out. So I talk about what's the week look like.
It's called Pattern Matching Time. Pattern Matching.
Right? Pattern matching time. And then I get into what's a 6+1. Is there examples of 6+1 in the Bible? Tons of examples of 6+1. Then, is there an example of a Sabbath rest? What is the period of this rest? Right? Then we talk about, is there another example of a Sabbath rest? Well, there's 1,000-year Sabbath rest. Okay, that's when, right? So is there any other examples of a 1,000-year period in the Bible? Yes, there's 3 of them. One in Psalms, second in Psalms, and this idea of a day with the Lord is 1,000 years to us, right? And so it all lays it out there. It's so interesting. and I don't want to spoil the whole thing of this because just get into it because the storytelling in this is really interesting. But what it lays out for us is this idea that there's 6,000 years. The historians knew it, right? The Jews knew it, right? This is this is Barnabas, Cypriot Jew, he knew it. Rabbi Kitna, he knew it, right? Rabbi Elias, 200 years before Jesus, he knew it. And most importantly, so did the founder of the Adventist Church, J.N. Andrews. We think God chose a period of 6 days in order to represent the 6 days of 1,000 years each. And so then you can go into this whole rabbit hole of seeing the contextual history of each of these statements. Ellen White mentions it 42 times, 6,000 years, and every one of them are conditional. If it's already happened, she says over. And it says, if it's not about to happen, she'll say almost. And then there's this whole thing of like all the 6 and 1s. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but like, dude, it's all throughout the Bible. This idea of a 6 and 1 pattern. And then she does say very clearly, talking about this final prophetic week, the 70th week, how, when Christ was in the wilderness was 4,000 years. So 4,000 years was 27 AD. And 31 AD was 4,000 years again. And that comes into there. So we have this kind of concept of a final sort of time period. Not to say that this is when Jesus will return, because when will Jesus return? As soon as we get it together, because time has not been a test, right? So what is he waiting for? He's waiting for when the character of Christ is perfectly reproduced, he'll come and claim us as his own. When the fruit is brought forth, immediately puts forth the sickle. But yeah, I go deep on that stuff too. I'm with you, brother.
Oh man, this is good. I need to pick your brain, man. You have some amazing tools to work with.